The non-aggression principle is an ethical stance which asserts that aggression is inherently illegitimate. Aggression is defined as the initiation of physical force against persons or property, the threat of such, or fraud upon persons or property. In contrast to pacifism, the non-aggression principle does not preclude violent self-defense. The principle is a deontological or rule-based ethical stance. Now, I'm going to expand on some of the terms in this definition. So in step one, to flesh out the non-aggression principle, the who, what, where, how, why of all of this would be to define aggression. And as mentioned before, aggression is defined by classical liberals as the initiation of physical force against a person or their property, the threat of such, or fraud against that person or their property. So this is in the sense that no man is an island and we live in a society and such. But it's almost impossible, or I can't really think of too many ways that somebody can commit violation of non-aggression principle if they're by themselves. There's some situations where it kind of gets interesting when you talk about suicide, the effect that it has on other people, depending on how you commit suicide, and things like that do make for interesting conversations that may be had in different places. Now, the word initiation means that the force can be causally traced back to the will of a person while this person did not have permission to do that action. The relation between force and will is called causation. Here's an example. Imagine there's two prize fighters, it's like UFC, mixed martial arts, and they have that weigh-in where they kind of have the face-off and things like this, right? So the guy's getting his weighed in, then he turns off to the face-off, and he trips off the scale, and he flails his arm out, and ends up, fighter A, who's tripping, ends up punching fighter B in the face. Now, if fighter B all of a sudden goes back and starts punching fighter A, that would be a violation of the non-aggression principle because the causation of that action was a trip off of it, and he did not necessarily intend to punch fighter B. If those two same fighters go into the actual ring and the bell rings and they start punching each other, kicking each other, choking each other out, and they keep going on, during that time there's no violation of the non-aggression principle since they both agreed to be in there fighting. Now, if the bell rings and another punch or kick is thrown, that is a violation of the non-aggression principle, and the other person would be justified to jumping in and engaging in violent self-defense. Now, since humans are not simply our physical bodies, let's see where else and to what else we can apply the non-aggression principle to. So if property A of person A damages property B of person B, then you have an example of A initiating violence against B, because in this situation, person A has taken ownership over property A and therefore has responsibility over A. So here's a more practical example of how this applies. We'll go back to the prize fight from before. So this is the waning seconds of the match. Both fighters, their last moves are a straight hook combo. Both of them connect with it. The bell rings, or the buzzer is buzzed, I think that's the term. And then you have a situation where fighter A is still angry. He didn't like what happened in the fight. He rushes fighter B and throws another straight in the hook. Even though it's the same exact straight hook that he did 10 seconds before, that's a violation of the non-aggression principle because the bell has rang. Fighter B decides to respond with the same straight in the hook. In his situation, he's engaging in violent self-defense, which is not a violation of the non-aggression principle. Fighter A is disqualified after the ref and other people break them up. The match is awarded to fighter B, and they're sent to the back. So on the way back, fighter B is still very angry, and he decides, oh, that's a broomstick on the side of the hallway. I'm going to grab it, run to the locker room of fighter B, and start smashing things. Now, all these things are property of fighter B or other people. That broomstick was property of the arena, but he has taken ownership of the broomstick by grabbing it and is smashing all these other things in that locker room that are not his. That's a violation of the non-aggression principle, even if he says it's due to the punches after the fight, which is the initial violation. That interaction is stopped. Then to go further, he's still angry. He goes into his vehicle outside in the parking lot, property of fighter A, vehicle A, and goes and slams into the vehicle, which is property of fighter B, vehicle B. That, again, is a violation of the non-aggression principle, a further violation of it. Next, I'd like to focus on deontological. Now, I've been met with this argument or appeal a few times, and some of you may have made this or heard it on your own. Somebody comes up and says, "Oh, you don't believe in God? You don't have theology? Without religion, the world would crumble. How would we find out what's right or wrong?" Or alternatively, people will say, "Oh, you're against the state? You're not pro-state, you're anti-state, you want the reduction of the state. Without the state, who's going to set the rules? How are we going to know what's right or wrong?" These are religious ways of thinking. And I think with a system like the non-aggression principle that's deontological in nature, we can have this foundation. Because as it's defined here in moral philosophy, deontological ethics or deontology, from the Greek term deon, which means obligation or duty, is a normative ethical theory that the morality of an action should be based on whether or not that action itself is right or wrong under a series of rules, rather than based on the consequences of that action. Now, a positive of this, I think, is you don't have to look at the situation and say, "Oh, my God won't punish me for this action because that person is not under the protection of the God. My God may actually reward me for this action because it's stated if I take some property from that person and give it to my God or people who believe in my God, then I can actually be rewarded from that." That's a positive action. Or someone can go and say, "Hey, okay, well, my government says I have to do this. And my government is not going to punish me for this. They actually might reward me if I go and I grab this land that's owned by these other people and transfer it to these other people. Oh, I'm a government official. Just because I'm out here and I am given the power and I'm above any consequences for doing this action, I will go ahead and do this action despite what these other people, if these other people below me did it, then they will be punished. So that makes that action bad when they do it since there's consequences. But if I do it, there are no consequences. You just simply think, do I own myself? Do I own this property? Does that person own themselves? Do they own that property? And if we initiate force on either side, that's a wrong action. And then you have a way to live a good life and have a system of morals and ethics to live by. So I'd like to finish this off by going back to the Mises Wiki, which is by the Mises Institute, which I'll be using for a lot of these definitions of socio-political issues because I agree with most of the things that are put here. And I'll discuss a bit as I talk about this. So spying is an example of aggression because it requires gaining of access to a person's property, which is force, without their permission. And note that communication requires the initiation of force to gain access to a person's sensory organs. If politeness is kept, though, permission for communication is usually given after that fact. So that first one with the whole spying situation. If you have a significant other and you pick up their phone, you go through their emails and things like that, that's spying, that's a violation of the non-aggression principle. If you have a child and you have some kind of spyware, it's called spyware, right? On their phone or on their computer, and you're going in and checking and seeing what they do you consider yourself to own that child, even though you are, in the sense, responsible for what that child does? Isn't necessarily a violation of the non-aggression principle if you go in and do that. Let me know what you think below. And now with the whole communication requires the initiation of force to gain access, this is a whole situation where it's come up a lot. The catcalling situation. Is catcalling, which is an initiation of some form of communication, actually a violation of the non-aggression principle if that woman decides you are not attractive enough, you don't reach a certain level of attractiveness that she finds to be pleasing to her, so she doesn't actually give you politeness for that communication. So in that sense, catcalling could be a violation of the non-aggression principle. Now, when you go to a situation like social media and you're scrolling through somebody's wall, you're scrolling through Twitter, you're watching YouTube like you did here, this communication is not necessarily a violation of the non-aggression principle because you probably saw the title, clicked on it, and decided to watch this video. But if you're just scrolling through Twitter and something's on the main wall, is that a violation of the non-aggression principle if something's read, even though you decided to go there and open that app or open that page and read what's on there? Let me know what you guys think. So that's it for the extended definition of the non-aggression principle. This is going to be part of a series of certain terms and things that I use a lot in my life and some of you may use, where I think it would be beneficial to have this as a link where somebody asks me, what do you mean by the non-aggression principle? I can just give them this link and they can check it out and maybe they can learn more. So it can be helpful in that way. I'm going to try to keep these around 10 minutes, and in a separate video, I'm going to read the entire post about the non-aggression principle from the Mises Wiki. As I mentioned,
The Mises Institute is a location with a lot of information that has helped me a lot, and I'll be finding other sources for things like this. Another video you might want to listen to if you enjoyed this one is a conversation I had with a friend of mine about private property. One of the core questions was, can you sell yourself into slavery? And earlier on in this video, I said humans are more than our physical bodies, our biological bodies, because I feel that it's your mind that possesses your body rather than your body that possesses a mind. So with that in mind, what do you think the answer would be to, can you sell yourself into slavery?